Hello everybody, this is Mike Fauché, and today I'd like to do a quick video on the Amcrest IP camera. Hope you enjoy it, and as always, don't forget to subscribe and click that notifications icon. Alright, let's get into the setup. The very first thing you have to do is to download the app. Even though we're going to use this as part of a Blue Iris setup, which I'll get to in an upcoming video, we're actually going to set this camera up using the app. There are other ways to do it, but this is actually the simplest way. So we'll go through and set it up with the app first, and then we can hook it up to whatever we want to once the device is configured. So first thing we're prompted with is welcome to Amcrest. We're going to hit start. And by the way, I've already plugged in the camera and plugged it into Ethernet, and even though we're going to use the Wi-Fi, I've actually plugged it into my router just for the initial setup. And how you hook it up, whether it's Wi-Fi or whether it's through hardwired, is up to you, but we're going to set it up using the app, and we're going to set it up using the hardwire. It's actually the best and most effective way to set it up, even if you're ultimately going to use it on Wi-Fi. The first screen that we get to is we're asked to either use to either set it up as a Wi-Fi camera, PoE camera, or search device. So I'm going to go ahead and search device. Okay, and as you can see, it's found several of my cameras, but the one that is actually new since I set static IPs on everything is this one here in the middle. So we'll go ahead and click on that guy. And now it's asking us what kind of setup we want. So I'm going to go ahead and pick Ethernet Wi-Fi setup. Okay, so we're at the screen where we're now going to set up the device. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a name. And we're going to log in with the password, which is the default password right now. Hit next. And it's going to go ahead and give me all of the Wi-Fis that are in my network. So I'm going to pick the one, hit next, and it says camera was successfully connected. So now it says to remove the Ethernet cable and wait 30 seconds. So let me do that. Okay, so then we're prompted to change the unsecured password. So I'm going to put test 1 2 3 4 5 6 test 1 2 3 4 5 6. Okay, so now it's changed to default. Would you like to learn how to use the app? We'll skip that for now. Telling us we can access the wizard at any time by going to the help screen. Click OK. And there we have it. We are now looking at a camera. Okay, so now that I've successfully set up the camera, I can leave it the way it is, but obviously this is not good enough because we're going to want to tie it into something. But this gets you set up and at least get the camera working on Wi-Fi. Now, the next step is to look at the configuration and see if we want to make some alterations here. Okay, now that we've set up the camera, we can also make some additional changes by tapping under the configuration menu and taking a look at some of these options. So if we go, for example, to Configuration Center, we can change how the motion detector works. We can change alarms, recording schedules, time and date, and then IP settings if we want to. We can go ahead and change that from dynamic to a static IP, which is probably something I would recommend you do. That way it doesn't change, because if you're going to call it out in an NVR or something like Blue Iris, it works better if it has a static IP. So I would definitely go in here and change it to a static IP of your choice. For now, I'm going to leave it the way it is, because I'm going to go through the second part of the configuration, which is actually to set it up using their software. Okay, so I've reset the camera so that we can start the configuration from the very beginning using a PC. It's a little bit more versatile when you do it through your computer, although as you saw from the app demo, it's pretty straightforward to get that camera attached to the Wi-Fi. Once it's attached and it has a static IP, then the next task is obviously to attach it to something like Blue Iris or an NVR or any other piece of software you want to use out there. I'm going to run through a couple different options in the next video. But if we look at this, I can tell right away that this is the camera here. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and click the configuration screen. And here we have a couple things that we can set right off the bat. So this is right now plugged into my router, so it's getting an IP address directly from the router. So what I'm going to want to change is I'm going to want to give it a different IP address, if I can give it a different IP address. Right now it's set up to DHCP. I'm going to leave it alone, but this is where I would recommend you change it to a static IP so that you can detect it in your software on a consistent basis. The other thing I'm going to want to change is the port number. So I want to get off of port 80. Now I'm going to want to change the HTTP port to something that I believe is a little bit more secure. So I'm going to go ahead and change that to, I'm going to call it 1037. And this is, I keep track of all of the ports that I assign in my IP addresses. Obviously, they will all work on the same port if it's within your own network. However, for security reasons, and I like to keep them on separate ports. It's not required, but it's just something that I've always done. It also gives me a little bit more versatility in how I can address the camera. For all practical purposes, to get it to work, all you need is a consistent port. The default is 80. 80 does work. There's no need to change it. I just prefer to. I leave everything else the same. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Now it's going to ask me to reboot the device. Let's do that. Okay, after we hit save, I went ahead and rebooted the camera, and as you can see, the camera that we just configured has now been detected. So I can now address that camera directly from the browser and make any changes to the camera itself. So what I'm going to do to access it through a browser is to make sure that I know this IP address. So I know this IP address and this port number. So let's go ahead and do that. And it takes me to the camera's login screen. So I'm going to go ahead and hit admin because that's the default. I'm going to go ahead and log in. It's going to ask me to change the password, which I'm going to do the same as we did on the other one. I'm going to hit test 1 2 3 4 5 6. Okay, so now I'm in the configuration screen. It wants me to install a plugin so I can actually view the camera, but for now I'm not super interested in looking at the camera. What I'm interested in is actually altering the configuration. So let's go into setup here. And here you're going to see a bunch of different things on how to set up the camera. And there's a lot of things you can do. What I'm going to tell you, if you're going to attach this to a different device, I'm going to show you what you need to do. So first thing is the network settings. So the network settings are kind of unique. If you're able to get directly into the camera, they give you a lot of different options. And this is the way I would recommend you actually do this. So first off, there are two interfaces on this card. So you have wireless and wired. Each one will get an IP address, or you can give each one an IP address. So right now I've got it wired as default because it's plugged in, and I'm going to give it a static IP address. And I'll leave it the way it is right now with the same configuration. And I'm going to hit save. And then I'm going to switch over to wireless. And I'm going to give it a static IP address. and I'm going to give it this IP address. So I'm going to hit save. So what I've done here is allow myself to attach to this camera any way I want. So if I want to use it wireless, I know what IP address to use. If I want to use it wired, I know what IP address. Because they are two different interfaces, they will have two different IP addresses. So this puts me in a position to where I can now attach it to something like Blue Iris or a NAS unit or anything else that drives IP camera. Okay, now that I've finished configuring the network, I've basically completed everything that's critical at this point. There's one other place I'd like you to take a look at and configure it. Although this can be this can be changed in your Blue Iris or your NVR, I'd recommend you do it here. So if we go under camera and we go under video, there's some options you can set here, and there's both a mainstream and a substream. And the difference between that is the substream is what's actually viewing on your portable or your desktop, whereas the mainstream is actually what's being streamed and recorded to your NVR or your computer. So you want to make sure that these are set correctly. The defaults are usually pretty good. As you can see here, they've picked up the 1080p default at 30 frames per second. And if you can lower that, obviously, if you want to change it to something else. And then the bit rate you can also lower if you want to change to something else. I would start with the defaults and then work my way across. And then here, same here, they've lowered the standard VGA resolution. I typically drop it to around 20 frames per second just because it just takes up less bandwidth, you know, especially on Wi-Fi. Yeah, on wired, it probably doesn't matter much depending on how many cameras you have. But once you complete those are really all you have to do. And now we're ready to actually attach this camera to Blue Iris. And we'll go over Blue Iris, some of the features, capabilities, and then we'll actually configure the camera to it. So once you've got to this point, you basically configured the camera for the proper video stream, network IPs. You're ready to attach this thing to something. Again, you can go back in and install the plugins if you want to look at the live view. So if you wanted to log in to and actually view the camera manually, this is how you would go about doing it. But again, the next critical thing is once the camera is now configured, is you now have to actually set it up into some type of configuration software. So we'll get into that on the next video. Before we complete this video, I wanted to mention one thing. Though mostly we've talked about hooking this up to something like Blue Iris, because that's basically my use case. I did want to point out and mention that this does have an SD card reader, or writer I should say, so you can record your content or this as an individual camera to an SD card. It's obviously limited to that one camera. It's probably not an ideal configuration for a multi-camera setup, but it is an option if you're just going to get one camera. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you understand better how to configure these cameras. Overall, they're not bad cameras. I have several of them, and they certainly do what they need to do. So I hope you enjoyed this. I'll leave affiliate links in the bottom if you're interested in picking one up. And look for my next video on setting up Blue Iris and all of the wealth of features that has, and we'll walk through kind of all the basic stuff you need to do. All right, hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you on the next video.